The truth is, I may never know. Are there any things in your life you wonder about, but you know that you probably are never going to actually find the answer to that? So I had a neighbor in college who, at first I thought was kind of cool, but then we ended up coming to blows, and part of that was because he threatened my roommate, and it was pretty uncalled for, and I stood up for my roommate, and we literally almost fought. All the guys came out of the dorm and was protecting us, and that kind of set up kind of a rocky relationship between the two of us for the entire time that we were neighbors and on the same floor. And I felt actually convicted about it because I never invited him to church. I didn't know what his deal was, and I processed it a little bit. I wanted to actually help them out, but there's that issue of annoyance and offense that we've already talked about in previous series, and I was just, I wish I would have, and I just didn't because I had this issue with him, and I thought he had this issue towards me, and I just always wonder, where did he end up? What did he do? Did he ever, is he following the Lord? Has he even heard about the Lord? And I found out sometime after the blow-up occurred that even before he actually came to school, this guy had gone through a whole cancer battle. He had struggled with cancer and come through it. And I'm like, man, if I'd known that, maybe things would have been different. I don't know. And to this day, I always wonder. I wonder what happened to Jeremy. Does he know the Lord? Does he not? See, we all have these kinds of questions sometimes on, the people in our lives. And sometimes there are people that we've known all our life, and sometimes there are people that are just there for a season of our life. And you wonder, now social media, Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and all the others, sometimes you can find out a little bit, but there's still some people that you just never really know what happened. So I just want to welcome those of you that are here today. I'm Pastor Jace O'Neill. I'm the lead pastor here at Red Church, and we are starting this brand new message series called Life on Mission. And I think this is a very important series as we are not very far away from Easter, and we want to get you all ready for Easter. So I'm asking you guys, get ready, because we're going to have a message today and start this series, something I think is very, very important. Now, obviously, some of you guys may not have even noticed this yet. Some of you noticed it, but you've gotten used to it, is today I'm on a screen. And part of the reason why that is because currently our team is in Kenya. So pray for us, pray for our team and what the Lord is doing there. But I really wanted to start this series off myself because I think this is so close to my heart. And also, I just think that the screen service, the screen thing just makes me look thinner. So I kind of like that it just kind of works for me. Plus, I can say what I want, and you guys can't do anything about me. I'm on the other side of the earth right now, so I can say what I want, and you can't throw anything at me. And don't throw anything at the screen either, or Bria and the tech team will hurt you. No, they're very kind. They're very kind people, but you mess with their tech, and your name becomes mud with them. I just want to highlight this real quick. If you're here and Jesus is not the Lord of your life, you're investigating your faith, or perhaps you're not, but you're just here because you're with someone, they're a family member, perhaps you're dating, or you're hoping that they'll date you by coming to church, whatever it is that you're trying to figure out. Just so you know, today's message is not directed at you, so you're off the hook. Though I think you might find it interesting because we're going to talk about Jesus' greatest commandment that often as Christians we ignore, which is something we really need to pay attention to. So if you're here, you're in church, you're off the hook. For those of us that say that we're followers of Christ, we really need to take this seriously, and I'm hoping that in this series we do that. This entire series, we're going to be looking at Jesus' great commandment. Matthew 22:37 and 40. And he said to them, you shall love the Lord your God with all, everyone say all, your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. So essentially, we're supposed to love our God with our entire being. This is the great and first commandment, and the second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So, we love movies, we love entertainment, we love TV shows, video games, and Something that's been out for a long time is superhero movies, and some people say that's dying out a little bit, and some people are like, no, it's just beginning. But let's just say we have superhero movies, and then before that, in the 1980s, we had these big, strong, like heroes, like the Rambo and like the Terminator 2 and beyond. So we had these big action stars. We had Bruce Willis in Die Hard. And before even that, we had Westerns. So you had good versus evil, things that are happening that we somehow, we keep engaging with. There's something about these things that attract to us. And sometimes they're not so macho. Sometimes they're something like Lord of the Rings, which has a fantasy edge to it. Why do we do this? Well, to some degree, movies are about wish fulfillment. A lot of movies that we like and become very popular are wish fulfillment. It could be action, it could be romance, it could be sci-fi, whatever it is. It could be something along the lines of a mystery where we figure out what happened and then justice is done. And that kind of speaks to our wish fulfillment of justice. We want justice to be done. And I think there's a deep down desire for every single one of us to make a difference in this life. We all want our lives to matter. And maybe we look at that in different ways. Sometimes it's relationships, sometimes it's success and career. But all of us want our lives to matter and to make a difference. And the amazing thing about the church, and I don't mean just our church, but the global church, which is essentially the bride of Christ, we have the greatest mission in the history of the world, and we have the greatest hero in Jesus Christ. So we have the best connection to the best thing. There's a reason why we long for these things, and that I think that's revealing our need and our hope for a relationship with the Lord, but also a life that really matters. See, God is the source of everything that we want that's good. God is a source of love and truth and purpose and meaning, and our sin separates us from God. So what that means is this, is that if we don't have a relationship with God, nothing's going to function right. And we will look to other things. We will look to people, we'll look to careers, we'll look to pleasure to try to answer those solutions, and it won't work. It won't work. So it matters that we think about these things. And that purpose drove the early church. The early church was on a mission. They were passionate. But often what we see in the church does not seem to look like what we see the church in the Bible. And I don't necessarily mean that it has to look exactly the same in the sense that you're in a different culture, so therefore it looks different. I'm highlighting that the main things sometimes don't seem to be the main things. Sometimes it's like going to church would be kind of like going to a football game and expecting to see a football game, but instead a rough outing of origami breaks out. It's like, that's not why I came here for. This origami thing, it does not look like what I thought it would look like. And sometimes I think that when we look at the church and even how we approach the church and how we think of the church is the same thing. We have this concept, but it's not really what it's meant to look like. See, we're called for the Great Commission. The Great Commission is the commission that Jesus gave every one of us. If Jesus is the Lord of your life, we are called, we call it the Great Commission. He's like, go and make disciples. And to make disciples, first people have to come in relationship with the Lord. And so in order for that to happen, we have to tell them about the Lord. So evangelism and discipleship are two sides of the same coin. They're not in opposition, they're together. All of us have to ask this question, and I'm going to ask you this question. Do we really believe what we say we believe? Do we really believe what we say we believe? And of course, the knee-jerk reaction is, of course. I know some people in this room that doesn't believe as much as I do. The danger of this is we always think of other people, but do we really believe what we say we believe? Because if we did, shouldn't our behaviors and shouldn't our priorities be a little bit different? In the book of Acts, you have the birth of the church. And the church seemed to be an unstoppable force. It seemed to be that the church was on such a mission from God that nothing could stop it, despite persecution. despite the fact that they had just recently murdered and killed Jesus on the cross. Jesus says, I will build my church, and the gates of hell can't even stop it. So the gates of hell will not be able to stop this thing. It's an unstoppable force. Jesus prophesies about the local church. He highlights that the enemy, nothing's going to be able to stop the expansion of the local church. This is why Christianity continues to thrive even in the face of persecution. It's amazing that people were, making different changes in their life to such a degree that people would sell property, take all the resources, and then give it to other believers. So this wasn't forced. It wasn't something that, the government made happen. This was something they chose to do of their own free will and their own resources. They were on such a mission that they would take all the resources, and if there was extra, and even sometimes even beyond that, they would help share it. And it was like we were all in this together. And that's just something that's a very foreign concept to us in America, because we really think by nature independently. And I don't know that I've ever seen, I've heard stories of other churches. It's almost like a fairy tale of like this thing that happened a long time ago in a place far, far away. I've never personally seen someone actually sell property and give it to the local church to advance ministry. I've never personally seen that happen. Because we're so much about my personal growth and my personal finances. But I think we're missing something, that we are to be on mission together. That's what the church is. The church is ecclesia, which is a common purpose and a common identity. Common purpose, meaning that, that we are meant to be on mission together with a common identity through Christ. Nothing seemed to be able to stop the church. And yet, if we look at the churches in America today, if I were just to be honest, the churches often seem very stoppable. Like, very stoppable. If you're offended at church, leave. I want to have fun, or I want to sleep in on my Sunday, I'm not going to show up. I broke a nail, I'm not going to show up. It's raining today, I'm not going to go to church. I'm not highlighting, if people are traveling, I'm not highlighting the legalistic. If you miss a week that you're going to, burn and go to hell. I am highlighting, though, that our priorities are probably not in the right priority. They're not in the right order. You change service times, and I've seen this with churches all around the country. You change service times, and there are some people who just will never come back because you messed up their routine. Now, I will say this real quick. I'm really proud of Red Church. We've changed service times at different moments, and I don't think that really impacts you. If we change service times, that really doesn't impact you very much usually. But probably because, you guys show up 30 minutes late anyway, so it's probably, you don't even know when the times start. I'm on a screen, so you can't do anything to me. I'm on a screen. So I'm, hello. I think people think that, the church starts, Pastor Jared's got to speak. Forget about the worship, forget about the announcements. I made it just in time. I don't know if any of you are laughing. And right now, the unfortunate thing is probably, I say this, and it's the one day we have multiple guests come in really, really late. If you're a guest, there's grace and there's mercy. But if you were serving, or you were scheduled to serve and you're 30 minutes late, there's no grace, there's no mercy. I'm kidding. There's grace for me. Probably not the other kids' members, but there's grace for me. But these issues, do they sound like an unstoppable force? Sounds a little bit sometimes when you hear the drama of why people get offended with each other, it sounds more like middle school. When you see some of the Christians, the way they're posting on social media, it's like, were you a mean girl in high school? Because you definitely don't sound like Christ online. It just seems to me that we don't seem very unstoppable. We seem very stoppable. The average Christian, this is the people who regularly go to church. The average believer goes to church once a month. Now, it doesn't always work out that like once in February, once in March. It usually is like, I went 3 times in May, and then I didn't go for 4 or 5 weeks. There's something going on with our priorities because our priorities are not in check. we seem quite stoppable. Oh, I don't like this style of music. I don't like this philosophy of preaching. Oh, the pastor combs his hair on the wrong side of his head, or whatever people. And again, if you're a guest and you're not a believer, you may not have ever heard this, but sometimes Christians, we can be very petty, and really we're not operating like Christ at all. We're not loving the bride of Christ. What we're often doing is acting like a consumer. And if we're acting like a consumer, we're easily stoppable, because we're not going to act with the right heart or with the right perseverance. I don't know if many Christians would go to church if Jesus was their pastor. We say we're a follower of Christ, but I mean, if Jesus was your pastor and he said, hey, like he did Peter, get me behind me, Satan, we might have some be offended by that. Or if, in the Bible, when it says one guy says, I want to follow you, and Jesus, but he goes, hey, wait, let me go say bye to my friends. And Jesus basically is like, if you won't follow me, you don't deserve me. It's like, if we heard Jesus say some of these things, we like the part where he says, be healed. We don't like the part where he says, go and sin no more. One guy came to Jesus, thought he was pretty on top of it, and Jesus tells the guy, go sell all that you have and follow me. Would any of us do that? If Jesus said, sell everything you have, now I'm not saying he's saying that to all of us, but if he did, how many people do you know who's ever done that? We say we follow Jesus, and then the question is that what we're really doing? Or instead of following Jesus, are we trying to fit Jesus in to our time frame and our purposes? See, we all have a desire for purpose, but the true purpose we'll never experience if we're living in disobedience to God. If we don't have that, if we're not operating in obedience, there's always going to be emptiness. This is why there's not going to be any relationship that's going to fix you. There's not going to be any job that's going to fix you. There's not going to be any level of success that's going to fix all the things that you want to fix. And again, Jesus' greatest commandment says essentially love God with all your being and love your neighbor as yourself. Let's go to that again. Matthew 22, 37, 40. And he said to them, you shall love the Lord your God with what? All your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your who? Who? Your neighbor, as yourself. So they asked Jesus, what is the greatest commandment? He doesn't give them one, he gives them two. Love God with all your being. Love your neighbor as yourself. Why? Because you can't love God if you don't love people. And if we love people, but we don't love God, then we're not going to have the source to love people. It's going to distort it. It's like, oh, what will happen in that regard is we'll go to the other extreme, and we'll go into, oh, we're going to be permissive to people because I'm going to love them. Well, no, if we love God, we're also going to love what's right and wrong. We're going to love, what I mean by that is justice. We're going to love when right and wrong is taken care of in the right way, that there's justice. In fact, the Bible says, if you say you love me, but you hate your brother, the Bible says you're a liar. And sometimes we do that. We say that we love people, but we actually don't live that out. So right here, Jesus gives a key to purpose, a desire to make a difference in the world. So our big truth today is this. We could change the world if we simply loved our neighbors. It doesn't matter what our job was. We could have the worst job in the world, but if we are loving our neighbors, we have a strong sense of purpose and meaning. We see the problems in our world, in our communities, and we even complain about them, maybe are fearful of them, but how many of us are doing something about them? If every believer would take Jesus' commandment seriously, we could change the world. And this is why you see in the early church, they took it seriously. They took Jesus' command to love your neighbor literally, and they changed the world. But the danger of our natural default in our culture is when we see God's promises, we only see them as an individual, me, myself, I, and that is not what the Word of God is meant for. Salvation is a personal relationship with the Lord that will lead us in a mission together. But there's two big reasons why we don't live this out. If you're taking notes, there's two big reasons why Christians don't actually live this out. Number one is metaphorical neighbors. We interpret Jesus' words as love everyone. Well, if you love everyone, that means you love no one. So I don't sit there and say, I love all women. My wife would slap me. I love one woman. I love her. My love is specific. As long as our love is metaphorical, it cannot be lived out. But as long as it's metaphorical, then it's good because we're off the hook. It's a concept, and we can apply it whenever we want and ignore it whenever we want. Love everyone, can't do it. We make a lot of things theoretical. Like, for example, somebody might say, oh, I don't serve the church, I don't serve other people, I serve Jesus only. Well, what that means is it's an excuse. I can serve Jesus because it's very theoretical, and therefore I'm accountable to no one, and I can do whatever I want whenever I want. And therefore we have to ignore certain scriptures like, hey, submit to your leaders, and the verses that tell us to love neighbors as yourself. Well, that's inconvenient because we are huge lovers of ourselves. As long as things are theoretical, as long as our neighbors are theoretical, as long as we're serving Christ but not specific people, then we cannot be held accountable, which means there's huge areas in our life that we'll probably not be obedient to, and we only want to obey at certain moments and times. As long as the neighbor is metaphorical, our love is metaphorical, which means it can't be lived out. It's a concept. When we aim at everything, we hit nothing. See, there are people that God has placed in your life. You have influence in your jobs, in your neighborhoods, in your schools. You have influence, and God has placed people in your life for a purpose and a reason. It is not we are to love others and love our neighbors as ourselves, as in, you know what, I'm just going to be kind. Okay, all right, that person is driving me crazy. Their road rage is just annoying me, but I'm just going to be nice and wave. Now, as Christians, we might need to be gracious and understanding, and I know sometimes that's hard to do in Virginia Beach and Hampton Roads. But this concept of, it's almost like a passive, basically, that concept is I'm just going to be nice to everyone. We become Ned Flanders from The Simpsons. Not a real person. See, one of the reasons why we don't love people is because our love is metaphorical. Who is in your life that God has put in your life, in your neighborhood, at your job, at your school? They're real people. We are called to love them, and not just to be nice to them, but to help them come to know the Lord. Another reason why we might not carry out this great commandment and love our neighbor is that we neglect the great commandment to begin with. And it's what I'd like to call convenient love. So convenient love is something that we do something because we feel guilty about it and we think something should be done, but it's very, very convenient. For example, someone, maybe a complete jerk to their neighbor or coworker or classmate or even family member, but they go and serve the homeless once a month. And as Christians, we should do these kinds of things. There's different ways to serve. You know, we have an impact small group, and that's great that we go out and serve. But here's the problem. Sometimes we do that because then we can schedule it. If it's nicely into our rhythm, we can go and be done with it and live the rest of our life the way we want it. And then the people in our neighbors and our coworkers are dying, going to hell. And we sit there and say, oh, but I'm doing my part. My nice boundary compartment where I don't have to be inconvenienced, where I don't have to be challenged, where I can not be put in a place where I'm uncomfortable, not where it might impact my livelihood or my career. We pick something to appease our conscience, and at that point, we're not really trying to love them. We're just trying to appease and not feel bad about this other stuff. It's convenient love. We make sure it fits nice and neat, because as long as I can go and serve the homeless, which is Christians, we need Christians to do that, then I can really ignore the person in my job, ignore the fact that they're dying and going to hell, and I can use them to advance my career. Because if they know I'm a Christian, or I try to invite them to come to know the Lord, then I might not get that raise. I might not get that promotion. We can come and go as we please. It makes us feel good. Sometimes it's because we don't like those people. It's easy to help someone who is open and says, I need help, someone who's homeless or somebody where you're blessing something. It's easy to help them because oh, well, thank you so much that you blessed us. But honestly, sometimes, I'll be honest. I don't like some of my neighbors. Like, some of them are annoying. When they don't fix their fence, it drives me crazy. When I've had other jobs, sometimes my coworkers, it's like. So, two reasons. One is it's metaphorical love. The other one, it's convenient love. See, Jesus tells us that we are to love our neighbors. So I'm going to ask us this question. I'm going to ask this big question. And the big question is this. How many spiritual conversations have you had in the past 6 months with individuals who are not Christians? And I mean that outside of the church. Not on a Sunday morning where you meet someone who's not a believer. Outside of the church, how many spiritual conversations have we had with non-believers in the last 6 months? Statistically, it's very low amongst Christians. Christians statistically that's been a low thing. It's not something most Christians do. So we are, the Great Commission, the Great Commandment, we are disobeying. Great Commandment, love God with all your being, love others, love your neighbor as yourself. Great Commission, go and make disciples. We are ignoring them. So the question again is, do we really believe what we say we believe? What's our holdup? Do we care? Do we love these people and their souls where we're going? Why is it not a priority? This whole myth of, I'm going to do it at some point, and then it never happens. See, we could change the world if we simply loved our neighbors. So I'm going to give us 3 suggestions to take the Great Commandment literally. Number 1, be real with ourselves. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love our neighbors as ourselves. Understand, if we're going to love our neighbors as ourselves, you have to understand yourself. You can't love yourself from a distance. So we can't love our neighbors from a distance either. Those of us that want to be Christians, but we want to isolate ourselves because we don't like people, as a Christian, that's not an option. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't take time to be away. Even Jesus took time to pray and seek the Lord. But we are not meant to live as islands. We are meant, even Jesus was in community of other believers. So here's the next step. If you're taking notes, write this down. A next step, make a list of 8 to 10 people you know are not believers. Make this list, and if you need to put it on your refrigerator, put it in your car, put it on your desk, write their names down. And this is a group that you interact with, your neighbors, coworkers, whatever it is, and begin to pray for them and be asking God for opportunities to help share your faith or invite them to church. Maybe often it's easier for many people to invite them to church, but a door might open up where you can share your testimony. Say, man, I went through something like that, but I'm so grateful for my church and for God who did this, and I'm so grateful I got into the Bible. Whatever it is. Now, I'm not saying be weird about it. I'm not saying being overbearing. I'm not saying, like, oh, they come in and it's like, oh my goodness, yesterday at work was so awful. Oh, that was awful. Turn or burn. I'm not talking about that. Where you're like fake listening to what they're saying and that the segue is so out of left field. But I do want us to look at a couple things. Because often as Christians, we are not living what God called us to live out. How do I know? Okay. Only 10% of Christians can fill out the names of 8 of their neighbors. 10%. Only 3% can fill out basic info of their neighbors. 3%. Only 1% can fill out a significant info of their neighbors. So what we're highlighting here is that Christians, we aren't living Jesus's, the second part of his great commandment. So if we're not, what is the greatest commandment? And he gives, love God with all your being, love your neighbor as yourself. He's highlighting this, and we're ignoring it. So if we say we believe Jesus, the question is, we have to ask each one of us, what's keeping us from obeying Jesus? Money? Okay, is money an idol? Our fun? Is that an idol? Our sports? Kids' sports? Entertainment? Pleasure? What's getting in the way? Again, do we believe what we say we believe? Now, there's grace and mercy because the truth is every single one of us will make poor time decisions. There are going to be times we get selfish, we get fearful, we just forget about this stuff. And so that's the amazing thing about Christ is that we can recognize, Lord, forgive me for my time. Forgive me that I've wasted my finances. Forgive me that I've missed opportunities. Please forgive me and help me to respond differently the next time. So the point isn't like, oh, bad, bad, bad. It's like, no, conviction, God, but change me so it can be different. So that we can show the love of God to others. Number 2, we have to care about the hearts of people. To love people, we have to care about their eternal destiny. I'm going to highlight something that I know might not be popular, or it may be accepted because we're like, okay, that sounds good, but in reality of living this out, we've got to love the heart of people more than our own career advancement. Good morning. We have to love people's souls more than our own discomfort of sharing our faith. I know some of you guys are like, well, I'm scared. I want to be able to do this. I just don't know how. That's why we have in our Growth Track 501, because that's one of the ways we help train people in personal evangelism. Another one, next step, is ask God to help us to love these people, to really, really love these people. Because so often we're so self-involved, we don't have time to love these people. Or, let's be honest, some of these people are very, very unlovable. Some of them are annoying. Some of them are frustrating. Some of them are just unlovable, but aren't we glad Jesus loved us when we were unlovable? Aren't we glad that Jesus took the time when we were unlovable? And number 3, love your neighbor as yourself. You don't love yourself by accident. So we have to be intentional about this. We don't just love metaphorical people. We love specific, real people, and we have to love them in a real way. That may mean take them to lunch. If you have kids, play date. Whatever it is, think about, pray. It's like, okay, if you make that list of 8 to 10 people, Lord, I just pray for 8 to 10 people. And, okay, God, help me to see how I can connect with these people. How do I have these conversations with them? Show me the door to walk through. Or God, show me who I can talk to improve in this area, to know what to do. I want to show you a very quick video of a family whose life was changed because they were invited to church.
We were invited to Red Church by our neighbors who were having a bonfire out back, and they just invited us over. There was a group of people out there.
Yeah, they were really cool and down to earth.
And it ended up being a Red Church small group that we didn't know about at the time. So we tried Red Church, and
everyone was so warm and welcoming. We felt loved right away.
Yep, and Pastor Jace's message connected with me. I'd never been a member of a church. I was a non-believer at the time. That invitation changed the trajectory of our family's entire lives.
We felt comfortable just being ourselves. We loved the diverse culture and the come as you are attitude. So we kept coming.
Yeah, and I came to know Christ and was saved there, and our daughter was saved there and was baptized.
And both of our boys were dedicated, and it's really changed the dynamic of our family and our life. Jesus really does, he changes everything.
So we have a couple that's been in our church for a little while now, and it started because someone invited them, and it's changed their marriage and their family. They're very much involved. In fact, I'm actually in a small group with this couple right now. You just never know. And so that person, you're like, well, they would never go to church. Don't assume that. I mean, he didn't come from a church background either. Rob didn't come from a church background either. So don't just write somebody off. Here's some next steps. One is, again, as we said, is make a list of 8 to 10 neighbors, people that are close to you or are at least in proximity to. Another one is to begin to pray for them. Just begin to pray for them. Pray for an open door to have a conversation. Pray that their heart would be ready. Next is invite them. Invite them to church. That's often the simplest thing to do, and that's why we give you these cards. I know some of you guys can invite people on Facebook. We have on Easter, we have like an event. You can invite them, or social media, you can tag them, whatever it is. But take some of these. Take more than one of them. Take them and pray over these as you invite someone. Also, if whoever you're talking to has kids, invite them to Excellent Adventure. Tell them about how fun it is. Our kids love these things. And so I know a lot of the kids enjoy these things. And then tell them, if you come to church, if you come to the church service, you can actually be the first in line to this event. So, I mean, parents do all sorts of crazy things for their kids. I mean, it's ridiculous sometimes what parents do. But there are some people who would never go to church, but if they know that their kids can have fun, they would endure a church service so their kids could have a good time. So maybe if that's someone that you know, invite them. We could change the world if we simply loved our neighbors, one person at a time. Would you close your eyes for a moment? Could you imagine what we could do as believers? Could you imagine what we could do at Red Church if we simply took Jesus' words literally and loved our neighbor? If we loved our neighbors as ourselves, I think that people would trust Jesus more because they'll learn to trust his followers more. If you just look at me again, I believe that people would trust Jesus more when they believe they could actually trust his believers more, because we begin to live out in our own weakness and frailty and humility. We begin to live out what he's called us to do. I think when the world sees that we're living like everybody else, it's hard for them to take us seriously. Now, in a moment, someone's going to come up and they're going to lead us into prayer. So don't go anywhere. Stay in an attitude of worship. Someone's going to come up here, and we're going to commit this to prayer. If you're here and Jesus is not the Lord of your life, we're going to give you a chance to respond to that. If you're here and you want this message to get into your heart, you want to have a love of people more, you want to get over your fear, or you want to know how to do this more, or there's people in your life that you want to come to know Jesus, if that's you, we're going to pray for you, and we're going to pray together. So don't go anywhere. But I just want to tell you, currently our team's in Kenya telling people about Jesus. The only reason I do that, and the reason why I planted this church, is because people we love are dying and going to hell, and there's a real heaven and there's a real hell. And God uses us to share his love with them. And if we want to protect people from eternal damnation, then in all humility, if we want to help them to avoid damnation, we have to give a damn. I love you guys. I'll see you next week. I'm going to hand this off.